The oldest manuscripts of the document, announcing the world's most consequential news, originally ended with the messengers fleeing in terror and saying absolutely nothing to anyone.
Yeah, I mean, it is arguably one of the most abrupt, jarring, and psychologically complex conclusions in all of ancient literature.
Right. Within the next few minutes, we're going to uncover how everything you might assume happens next, the dramatic appearances, the triumphant speeches, was likely tacked on by later scribes who just couldn't handle that terrifying, silent cliffhanger.
They really couldn't. Yeah, it was too much tension.
So for you listening right now, here is our mission. Today, we are taking a deep dive into the producer briefing on Mark chapter 16 from the document Scrolls and Secrets. Our goal is to strip away the assumptions and the polished, modernized versions of these stories you might have absorbed over the years.
Exactly. We want to explore the raw historical context, the massive political tension woven into the background, and, well, the structural irony of this ancient text.
Because the details here, the ones that seem purely logistical on the surface, they actually carry immense weight, don't they?
Oh, absolutely. Once you understand the mechanics of the first century Roman world, it changes everything.
But before we unpack the gritty realities of first century Judean burials, ask yourself this. How exactly did a man executed by the state as a criminal end up secured inside a high-status family tomb in the first place?
Well, the text tells us this specific tomb is in play because of a council member named Joseph of Arimathea. Before this chapter even opens, he used his social capital to claim the body directly from Roman custody.
Wait, I need to stop you there because that doesn't really make sense to me. If Rome executed this man essentially for sedition, as a public enemy, why would the Roman authorities just hand the body over to a local official?
Right, it seems counterintuitive.
Yeah, wouldn't standard operating procedure be like a mass grave to make a brutal public point?
Under normal circumstances, yes. I mean, Roman crucifixion was designed to deny the victim any dignity, including in death. The bodies were often left on the crosses or discarded.
Wow.
But Joseph of Arimathea is described as a respected member of the council. He leverages his political standing with the Roman governor to request an exception.
Oh, so he has the pull to get around standard procedure.
Exactly. And Rome, which relies on the cooperation of local elites to keep the peace, they grant it. So the body is placed in his own newly cut, rock-hewn tomb.
Which completely shifts the scene. We aren't looking at a shallow, unmarked ditch. We're looking at a high-security, private family property.
Yeah, and that sets up the logistics for everything that follows.
Okay, let's lay out the timeline for those logistics. It is sunrise on the first day of the week. The Sabbath has just ended. 3 women, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome, arrive with burial spices.
Which was a strict requirement of Jewish burial custom at the time. The body had to be anointed with aromatic spices to counteract the smell of decomposition and, to honor the dead.
Right.
But we have to look at the psychological toll of this timeline. The crucifixion happened late on a Friday afternoon. Sundown on Friday marks the beginning of the Sabbath, a day of absolute rest where no work, including the purchasing of spices or the preparation of a body, is permitted.
So they're forced into a holding pattern. They basically have to sit in agonizing silence for over 24 hours, entirely unable to perform this final act of dignity for someone they loved.
Yeah. The incoming Sabbath made the required custom completely impossible until this exact moment, sunrise on the first day of the week. They are rushing to do the bare minimum the second they are legally and religiously permitted to do so.
But as they walk, they are facing a massive practical problem. The text says they're worrying about the stone. I always used to think of this like showing up at a bank vault with your safety deposit box key and suddenly realizing you don't have the combination to the main door. But based on the political context we just discussed, it's heavier than that, isn't it?
Way heavier, yeah.
It's like arriving at a massive bank vault only to realize the FBI and the IRS have locked it down with federal crime scene tape.
That analogy captures the tension perfectly. Moving that stone isn't just a physical problem, it's tampering with a politically charged site.
Right.
And the physical problem alone is staggering. We often picture these stones as modest grave markers, maybe a boulder you could push aside with your shoulder.
Like a heavy door.
Right. But the historical context of a high-status rock-cut tomb in first-century Judea means this stone was typically a massive, heavy disc rolled down a slightly declined, carved channel to rest directly in front of the entrance.
So it uses gravity to lock into a track.
Exactly. And moving back up, that incline is not a one-person job. It required several strong men and usually a lever. This is a serious security feature designed to keep out grave robbers and scavenging animals.
So when the text specifically notes that the stone was very large, a first-century audience wouldn't gloss over that.
No, they would instantly register the sheer physical impossibility of three women moving it.
Right. So they arrive at the vault, fully expecting this impossible physical barrier, and they look up, and the stone is already moved.
Yeah.
They step inside, and there is no body. Instead, they find a young man dressed in white, and he delivers what the briefing calls the central announcement of the document. He tells them, Jesus of Nazareth has risen, the tomb is empty, and they need to go north to Galilee.
And that geographic instruction is where the narrative shifts gears. They are told to leave the immediate vicinity of Jerusalem and head to a very specific region.
Let's talk about that geography because the briefing highlights this. The instruction is to go to Galilee, which is about 100 miles north of Jerusalem. For those of us who aren't first-century historians, what is the actual difference between these two places?
Well, administratively, Rome runs Galilee through a client-king apparatus.
Hold on, let's translate that. What exactly is a client-king apparatus? Are we talking about a puppet government?
You can think of it like Rome's approach to franchise management. Rome is the corporate headquarters, holding ultimate military power. But rather than micromanaging every province, they install or tolerate local rulers, client kings, who understand the local customs and languages.
So they outsource the local politics.
Exactly. These local managers handle the day-to-day administration as long as the taxes flow to Rome and riots don't break out. So Galilee is part of the same broad Roman political machine as Judea.
But locally, on the ground, it feels completely different. If Jerusalem is like Washington, D.C., filled with elite politicians, heavy security, and the religious establishment of the temple, Galilee is more like a rural border town.
The D.C. versus border town dynamic is a great way to view it. The text points out that Galilee has a more mixed population. It sits on major trade routes, so it has more international traffic and influence.
Right.
Culturally, it is historically associated with a northern tribal identity that has always been slightly suspicious of the southern Judean elites. Heading to Galilee, physically and culturally, places the disciples away from the immediate hostile reach of the temple establishment.
It's Jesus's home territory, a completely different sphere of influence.
Right.
They are told to retreat to this distinct northern territory, but here is where the text gets incredibly specific, and I want to look closely at the phrasing in Mark 16.7. The young man tells the women, "But go, tell his disciples and Peter." Wait, why separate Peter from the rest of the disciples? Why call him out by name?
Well, this is a highly pointed acknowledgement of Peter's earlier actions in the narrative. Remember, just days prior, Peter vehemently denied even knowing Jesus to protect himself.
Yeah.
The narrative doesn't let him just blend anonymously back into the group of the disciples. He is singled out.
Put yourself in Peter's shoes for a second. You have just actively and publicly denied knowing this man to save your own skin. You are sitting in grief and shame. And now these women come back and say, we have a message for the disciples. Oh, and specifically for you, Peter. What is going through your head? Is it forgiveness or is it a summons for judgment?
And the brilliance of the text is that it never explicitly resolves that tension. We don't get a neat, tidy scene of reconciliation between them in this original text.
Wow.
The acknowledgement of his denial, that lingering question of whether he's being called back to be forgiven or called back to answer for his failure, is just left hanging there for the reader to sit with.
Which brings us to how the women actually react. They've received the announcement, they have their clear instructions to go to Galilee and tell the disciples, and they absolutely blow it.
Yeah, they do.
The drama of Mark 16.8 is that they do the exact opposite of what they are told.
They flee the tomb.
The text explicitly says they fled from the tomb for trembling and astonishment had come on them, and they say nothing to anyone, for they were afraid.
It is vital to look strictly at how the text describes their reaction. It is sheer, unadulterated terror, trembling, astonishment, fear. The text doesn't say they lost their faith or they decided the young man was a hallucination.
Right.
It roots their silence in pure, overwhelming panic.
But I have to push back on this. They just encountered a messenger who told them the person they are mourning is actually alive. Wouldn't the default human reaction be immense relief or, joy? Why is the text so focused on terror?
Because in ancient literature, a genuine encounter with the divine or the supernatural is never described as a warm, comforting experience. It is a reality-shattering event.
Oh, I see.
The boundaries of life and death, the very laws of physics that govern their world, have just been casually broken. To a first-century mind, standing in the presence of that kind of raw, uncontained power is profoundly dangerous. The terror is the proof that they understand the gravity of what has happened.
Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine you're reading this document for the first time. You get to verse 8. The women run away terrified, and they don't tell a single soul.
Yeah.
That's it. It's like a movie building to this massive world-changing climax, and right when the heroes are supposed to deliver the critical message to save the day, they just run into the woods and the screen abruptly cuts to black.
That is the exact editorial cliff we're dealing with. And it is a massive point of scholarly debate. Some scholars believe the gospel almost certainly ended right here at verse 8. Women, silence, fear.
Just fear.
No appearances of Jesus, no grand commission, no ascension into heaven, just sheer terror and absolute silence.
Which is a wild structural choice. The document announcing the most consequential news in the world ends with the first witnesses struck completely mute by fear. If the text ends there, it forces you, the reader, to carry the message forward because the characters inside the story failed to do it.
It is arguably the sharpest textual irony in the entire chapter. But, human nature abhors a cliffhanger, an ending that, abrupt and unresolved, simply didn't sit well with everyone who encountered the text in the centuries that followed.
So later scribes decided to attach what we now call the extended ending. That's verses 9 through 20. They tried to fix the cliffhanger.
The text may suggest that this later edition actually reads less like a seamless continuation and more like a digest of traditions gathered from other sources.
Like a summary.
Yeah, it shifts in vocabulary and tone. It feels like a compilation designed to rapidly check off and tie up all those loose ends that verse 8 left dangling.
But here's what fascinates me about this so-called fix. Even with the scribes adding these appearances, they don't turn the story into a joyous, triumphal celebration. The extended ending is just a relentless cascade of disbelief.
It is a remarkable structural choice by those later scribes. They add an ending to smooth things out, but the ending they add is utterly filled with failure.
Let's track how this plays out in the text. First, Mary Magdalene goes and actually reports the appearance to the grieving disciples. She speaks up.
Right.
The result, she is not believed. Then, 2 travelers report having an encounter with Jesus on a country road. They come back and tell the rest of the group. The result, they are not believed.
And the rejection of the news isn't coming from their enemies. It isn't the Romans or the temple authorities suppressing the truth. It is coming from inside the room.
Wow.
The inner circle is entirely rejecting the testimony of their own peers.
This culminates in Mark 16.14. Jesus finally appears to the 11 disciples themselves as they are sitting at a table. And is it normal for a triumphant return to start with a scolding? Because he formally rebukes them.
Yeah, the exact wording is that he rebuked them for their unbelief and hardness of heart. He indicts them because they absolutely refused to believe the people who had seen him.
That's intense.
It is. This opening to the resurrection appearance cuts completely against any triumphalist reading of the text. It is a moment of severe correction.
The structural irony here is staggering. You have 16 chapters of characters constantly failing to understand what is happening. They miss the point over and over. They abandon him, they deny him, they refuse to believe the witnesses. And these are the exact people who are then given the massive universal commission in Mark 16.1 Fiend to go into all the world and preach the good news to the whole creation.
Well, a first-century audience steeped in Hebrew narrative would have instantly recognized this rhythm. This is a recurring pattern in ancient traditions. The right people are always the last to see what is right in front of them. The chosen messengers are always the ones stumbling over their own unbelief.
But despite that stumbling, the commission they receive in that room is incredibly dangerous. We have to talk about the political tension here because it is heavy. It isn't just a polite suggestion to share a new spiritual philosophy.
No, the political architecture in this chapter is fascinating because it is entirely implicit. If you read Mark 16, you won't see a Roman governor. You won't see any Roman soldiers. The ruling council doesn't issue a single order in this text.
So on the surface, it appears to step completely outside the Roman administrative machinery.
But that machinery is still load-bearing for the whole story. Think back to the stone in front of the tomb.
Right.
That sealed stone wasn't just a door to keep animals out. It was Rome's implicit guarantee that the executed stayed executed. We have to understand how crucifixion functioned in the Roman Empire.
It wasn't just execution.
Exactly. It wasn't just a method of execution. It was a highly calculated public order tool.
Yeah.
It was state violence designed to terrorize the local population into submission and send a very specific message about the absolute power of Rome.
Because Rome's entire authority relies on the premise that when they crush a rebellion, it stays crushed. The dead stay dead.
Right.
So any narrative that suggests the condemned person somehow overcame that state violence is, by definition, a wildly destabilizing claim to the local governors.
And that is why this commission, to go into all the world, is so radical.
Yeah.
It is an explicitly universal directive. It recognizes absolutely no boundaries. It doesn't care about Roman provinces. It doesn't care about the jurisdictions of client kings. And it completely ignores ethnic boundaries.
It just blankets everything. And the message itself is inherently treasonous, right? Preaching that a man Rome had publicly formally executed as a state criminal was now alive and sovereign. The text uses the concept of being at the right hand of God. For a listener today, that sounds purely theological, but what does that actually mean politically in the first century?
Well, that phrasing is language borrowed directly from ancient royal enthronement psalms. Claiming someone is at the right hand of God is claiming they hold the ultimate throne. It bypasses Caesar completely.
Wow.
This is not spiritually neutral speech. In the first century Roman world, the term good news, or euangelion, was often used as an imperial term to announce a military victory or the ascension of a new Roman emperor.
So to take that specific imperial term and apply it to an executed criminal.
It is a direct counter-proclamation aimed squarely at every single power structure that had signed off on the execution in the first place. You cannot proclaim a new universal sovereign without inherently challenging the current sovereign.
When you trace the arc of just this one chapter, it is incredible. It starts with an empty family vault wrapped in the tension of state execution and 3 women paralyzed by reality-shattering terror. And it transforms, despite the constant disbelief and failure of the inner circle, into this massive counter-proclamation against the Roman Empire itself.
It forces the reader to confront how disruptive this message actually was in its original context. It wasn't a safe, polished theological point. It was a dangerous, boundary-breaking reality that began with terror and ended with a challenge to the known world.
We want to hear from you. Drop a comment below with your thoughts on today's historical drama. Put yourself in the shoes of those first readers. Would you have preferred the raw tension of fleeing the tomb in silence, leaving the responsibility up to you, or are you siding with the scribes who needed a cleaner, tied-up ending to handle the shock?
We love reading your perspectives on how these ancient texts function. And of course, if you found value in stripping away the assumptions and exploring the raw history behind these ancient words with us today, please hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss one of our deep dives.
And remember to check the description below for exclusive links to our sources, including the Scrolls and Secrets briefing, and for further reading on the administrative mechanics of first century Judea and Galilee. There is always more historical context to uncover.
Absolutely.
We leave you with this final provocative thought. What happens when these fearful, doubting disciples actually follow that final commission? In the next chapter, we will see them take this very message out into all the world, stepping directly into the path of the powerful Roman structures that executed their leader, and preaching the good news to the whole creation.